Hey, what's up, guys? It's Michael from the Honest Youth Pastor back with another video where we look at hashtag progressive Christian TikToks. If you're new here, what we do is we listen through the entire TikTok and then we go back through and address the questions and or statements presented in that TikTok. So let's go.
I have a 4-year degree in Jesus stuff from a conservative university, and I came out a progressive post-liberal. Here's some of the things me and my conservative classmates learned. There are 2 creation stories in Genesis. They conflict with each other, and they were written by 2 different groups of people at completely different times in history with different political motivations. None of the Old Testament was written by Moses. Lots of the stories in the Bible coincide perfectly with ancient creation myths from other civilizations. The Israelites didn't believe that there was one God until they were exiled in Babylon. Most stories in the Old Testament are allegory. Think like Lord of the Rings or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If your pastor went to college for their job, they probably learned all of this. If you didn't know all this, it's because they chose not to tell you. Either 1, because they're ignoring it, or 2, because they don't think you can handle it. Both of these options are deceitful.
All right, so that was the TikTok. As always, guys, be nice, don't be trolls, be Christ-like. All right, good deal. So we're going to go back through, going to look at the point she presented, going to see, are there answers to these questions? Are there rebuttals to her statements? Because she's made some pretty big statements here that some people, honestly, like she said, if you've not specifically been in like an Old Testament history class or like some very in-depth sort of theological class in which these things are discussed, you may never heard of them and you might be like, what did she just say? Like, is that what? Right? So let's go through them and kind of look at her points. So let's start with the first one.
I have a 4-year degree in Jesus stuff from a conservative university, and I came out a progressive post-liberal.
Okay, so I'm not sure what a 4-year degree in Jesus stuff from a conservative university means. That's very vague. Now, what I can say, because we don't know what the degree was or where she went, so that we can't base a lot of it on there. But we do need to at least, in all seriousness, say that that's what she's basing what she's about to say on. I do want to note that there are 3 things here that should be pointed out. The first is that anybody that comes out of a 4-year university in which they've studied theology and biblical studies is usually pretty arrogant. Not intentionally. It's just you learn all of this stuff and you're just like, I'm going to tell everybody, like, because you never heard it before and you know nobody else ever heard it before. And now you want to tell and teach everyone the things you know. Similar thing happens at seminary. But the point is, like, everybody like runs out of the gate, right? Because they want to tell everybody their new knowledge. So it's just got to slow your roll a little bit. 2, we just need to look at the fact that some of the things she says here, and we're going to cover them, would be better based on if we actually knew what her 4-year degree was in, right? Is it in biblical literacy and tradition? Is it in basic? Is it in pastoral studies? Is it in history, right, of the Near East? What's her degree in? It's Jesus stuff. That's very vague, but those 3 things are pretty important. So let's keep going and see what else she has to say here.
Here's some of the things me and my conservative classmates learned. There are 2 creation stories in Genesis. They conflict with each other, and they were written by 2 different groups of people at completely different times in history with different political motivations.
Okay, so there's a lot there, right? So the first thing, I think surely everyone would know, right, that there are 2 Genesis accounts, Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. Now, she claims that these 2 accounts conflict. I don't know if that's the right word usage, because if you read through them, you're going to see that the order of certain things is out, but so is the focus of some things. Now, there's a couple ways you could take this, just in case no one's ever covered this with you before. There's 2 primary ways that at least I know of that people take this. That would be that Genesis 1 is more of a poetic sort of recounting of creation, whereas Genesis 2 on through like Genesis 5 is more of a narrative, God interacting with his people sort of situation. And then the other way to look at it is that Genesis 1 is a very very purposeful list of like 1, 2, 3, this is how it happened sort of situation. And then Genesis 2 through 5 is more of, again, an interaction, more of a narrative. So there's ways to take that. Now, there are some things that you have to look at when you see that, certain things seem to be a little bit out of order, or certain things, for example, aren't necessarily gone into as much detail. However, and I'll include this link in the description below, Tim Keller, though I don't agree with him on everything, I think that he kind of breaks this down pretty well in this short clip that you're going to see in the description, where he says that there's no way that somebody was like, well, we don't know what to do with these two accounts, so we'll just stick them in there together, and we'll let it come out in the wash. Like, it was intentional that both of these were put in right next to each other. Like, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't like somebody was like, they won't notice, right? So the idea here that nobody knows that there's two accounts of creation and that they are out of order when you read them, like you can just read them now, and there's certain things that aren't in the particular order, is a bit I'm not sure why this is a big point for her, but it is. And then she also says, and I want to make sure we get it here,
in history with different political motivations.
That was the thing. They were written two different times in history with two different political motivations. The first point here is that there is pretty well consensus on the fact that one of the two accounts is older. I believe, and I'm just going to show that I'm not fully vested in my knowledge of this, but I believe Genesis chapter 1 is the older account as far as if you look at the language and stuff. One of the two has an older sort of Hebrew language, and it's noticeable in the original text, and therefore there's this leaning to say that this seems to have been written quite a bit earlier than the other account. The political leaning part of it, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't find that anywhere. In any article that I tried to find, in anything that talked about the two accounts of Genesis, I'm not, just to be frank, honest, I don't know what she's talking about here, other than perhaps the portrayal of God in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2. Genesis 1, God is a much more overarching figure, whereas in Genesis 2 on through 5, he's much more of an interpersonal sort of deity. So maybe that's what she's talking about, but I honestly, the stuff that I found, I couldn't find that in there at all. So let's keep going.
None of the Old Testament was written by Moses.
Okay, so that's one of her accounts there. Now, obviously, if you know anything about right, like we've talked about this whole week as far as authorship and how authorship is given to different accounts that we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you'll know that there's always going to be people that that will say, well, this doesn't seem like it matches this particular author's style. Or in the case of Moses, like she's talking about here, there's an article I'll include below. It's a Wikipedia article. You'll see it. But the idea here is that just chronologically, some of the dates that were included and some of the word uses that was used would seem to indicate that Moses wouldn't have worded it this way, or he wouldn't have been alive at this particular time in order to record what he says. The idea here is, though, that you have to sort of figure out and work out is that traditional Judaism held to the fact that Moses was the writer of the Torah, right? Specifically Genesis. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. But the point is that he was the writer of these things, and you have to kind of contend with that with the text. There's 3 specific verses in the New Testament that kind of allude to the fact that this was the general idea between the Pharisees at the time, Jesus, the disciples, all note this. The 3 texts that you can look them up: Mark chapter 10, verse 3, Luke chapter 24, verse 27, and John chapter 1, verse 17. So there's this indication that not only within traditional Judaism, but also within the apostles and Jesus and the religious leaders of Jesus' day, there was this idea that Moses was the one that actually wrote this, or at least there was this idea that the power of kind of his name was behind it, and therefore it had authority. You're going to have to work that out on your own, right? There's no way that we're going to be able to break this down in this video. I'm simply refuting this point to say that there's no way for her or me to know definitively if Moses did or did not write all of them. So at that point, we have to appeal to tradition. We have to at least rectify what we see in Scripture as far as the general belief system and what was held there, and then just look at the evidence as best you can. Like I said, there's going to be a couple links in the description below that you can go through and do that research yourself. But again, the point of looking at these TikToks is to say that she's stating as fact, because of her 4 years of Jesus stuff that she got at a university, that this is a fact, in which you have to be like, well, it's not a fact. Like there's a lot more nuance behind this and a lot more work to be done to actually find what your position is on this and rectify it with what Scripture says. So that being said, let's keep going.
Lots of the stories in the Bible coincide perfectly with ancient creation myths from other civilizations.
Okay, so here's the big thing that I don't know if you guys saw it, and I honestly don't even remember what the documentary's name was, but I know it was like 13, 14 years ago. It was on YouTube, and it was like, look, the creation story of the Babylonians kind of ties in. There's a lot, actually, similarities between the Babylonian creation narrative and the creation narrative we have in Genesis. And it was just like, hey, see, Christianity's wrong. It stole all, or Judaism specifically, I guess in that case would be wrong. It stole all of its creation narratives and early stories from another nation. Now, you can look this up, and there's going to be 2 videos, I believe, 1 or 2 videos down below from Bruce Gore that he actually goes through and talks about that a little bit. He just presents the facts to you within sort of a historical kind of lesson, as well as one of them is more of a history class, and the other one's more of like a Sunday school Bible class where he kind of walks through Genesis specifically and talks about it. But you're going to see the similarities between the two. All of that to say that a lot of these TikToks come off like, oh, this is the silver bullet that shows that Christianity isn't real, right? Apparently, this young lady, I'm assuming the way she set up this TikTok is she went into college as a conservative and came out on the other side as a progressive post-liberal. That's kind of how she presents it, because she went in as a conservative, heard about this stuff, and now she's coming out the other side as a progressive post-liberal because she heard that Moses didn't write the Torah, specifically Genesis in this case, that there are creation narratives that are similar in many ways to the Genesis creation narrative, and that also that what was the other thing she said so far? I can't remember, but the point is that there's these certain things that have come up that now she's processed through, and she's coming out on the other side, a progressive post-liberal rather than a conservative, because of these things. These arguments are often presented as, oh, look, this proves Christianity wrong, when in fact, if you look into it, there's just some, you're going to have to look at the evidence and decide for yourself. You're going to have to say, well, the traditional Jewish view is that Moses did write the Torah, as well as it's referenced in the Scripture. So what do I do with that? You also do have to look at the Enuma, Elish, which is the Babylonian creation story, which does have some similarities to Genesis, but as you'll see in the videos below, because I don't want to make this video too long, there are distinct differences as well that make it distinctively Christian. So let's keep going.
Israelites didn't believe that there was one God until they were exiled in Babylon. Most stories in the Old Testament.
Okay, so the Israelites didn't believe that there was only one God until they were exiled in Babylon, was her statement, right? Now, many of you probably haven't heard this. I remember hearing about it not too long ago, honestly, and there's not a lot of information on it. There are 2 really good resources that I did include in the description below. One of them is a video, and the other one is an article. Both are very helpful, but just so you know, they come from outside of a Christian belief system. But basically, it's not problematic, and let me explain why real quick. They're explaining how the Israelites are worshiping other gods throughout what we would read happening throughout the Old Testament. Obviously, the biblical account gives us the view of the Israelites and the faithful remnant worshiping God and God calling them back through the prophets. Obviously, though, there's things happening outside of those prophets and that remnant worshiping God. There's things outside of that we see touched on within the Old Testament prophets that because we're kind of so outside of that culture and that time that we don't even know what's being said. That video below is a really short explanation of kind of what happens. There's an article that is pretty well done that kind of points at those sorts of things that helps us see just how much worship the Israelites were giving to other gods, and why so often in the Old Testament we talk about lots of times where God actually punishes his people and sends them into exile because of them worshiping other gods. And we go, well, that was bad, but we don't really even get the full weight of that until, again, if you watch that real quick video, read that article, you'll see just how idolatrous the Israelites were, and it gives just a little bit more of context to just how much they worshipped other gods, and it gives a really good context of what we see in the scripture of where God punishes them to draw them back. So let's finish up.
Are allegory things like Lord of the Rings or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If your pastor...
Okay, so her point was here, I'm sorry, we probably missed it here, but she's saying that...
Wardrobe. If your
Old Testament story, a lot of the Old Testament stories are allegories. That was her point. Now, there's not a whole lot to contend here other than the fact that depending on what university you go to and depending on what books you read and depending on what professors you had, there are going to be people that, again, have a certain leaning that tell you certain things, right? Many, if not all, progressive Christians that I know say that lots of things are allegorical in the Bible. For example, probably the most problematic would be an allegorical Adam and Eve, but they would also talk about an allegorical Jonah in the well, an allegorical Noah in the ark. Basically anything that's so large that it's like, oh, that's fairy tale like, they would attribute that to allegory. Now, again, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. But just know that depending on who teaches you that or who tells you that, there's probably some motivation behind it. And then we still have to rectify, how does this fit in the scripture? Because if this is all allegory, then how does what we see within the New Testament with Jesus' teaching and the apostles going forward, and for example, Paul and Peter and the letters that they write to the church, there are specific things here that not only Jesus ties to, for example, when he mentions Jonah, to kind of heed to the fact that this isn't an allegorical event. We also see Paul, for example, lean heavily on an actual Adam and Eve, and that being the result of why Jesus why Jesus came, right? So there's not a whole lot of rebuttal here other than to say that depending on who you talk to, they're going to tell you it's allegorical or not. So let's end with this point. So this video's not too long. Let's go.
Pastor went to college for their job. They probably learned all of this. If you didn't know all this, it's because they chose not to tell you. Either one, because they're ignoring it, or two, because they don't think you can handle it. Both of these options are deceitful.
Okay, so...
I have a 4-year...
Oh, sorry. So what she said here was that there are two options here to, if your pastor went to college and you haven't heard any of these things. The first thing is that I'm sorry, I don't want to misspeak for her.
Because they chose not to tell you.
Either they chose not to tell you.
One, because they're ignoring it, or two, because they don't think you can handle it.
Okay, so they're choosing not to tell you because they're ignoring it and they don't want to bring it up, or two, they don't think you can handle it. So her assumption is here that your pastor or your parents or your Christian friends are purposefully hiding these things from you because they know that if you know them, you won't be Christians anymore. That's sort of the idea here. Now, in reality, it's one of these things that we have to understand, as we've talked about on the Instagram page before, that context and, context is key. So why are the biblical prophets, for example, saying what they're saying, right? It's to point them back to God. Why are the narratives that we have in the Old Testament focused in the way they are? Because they're pointing to God. Why do we see so much emphasis on Jesus in the New Testament, especially within the epistles? Because that's the point of the writing, right? And now, should churches cover some of this stuff within some sort of maybe a discipleship class or like a new believers class? I would say it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. It would be one of those things, though, that you would want to do enough research so that you have the answers to the questions that are going to eventually arise, right? If you talk about, for example, the Enuma Elish, you're going to have to be pretty well knowledgeable of the Babylonian, right? The Babylonian creation tale, so you can kind of answer where it's different and where it's similar and why that doesn't affect the foundations of Christianity, right? You're going to have to be aware of that. Whenever you talk about the Israelites not believing in only one God until after the Babylonian exile, you're going to have to understand just so you know, there's a lot there. The article and the video I linked below are just scratching the surface. And then when you talk about Moses, right, the authorship of the Torah, there's a lot to go in there as well. So with that being said, should pastors be well educated in these things so that as pastors, we can communicate them in a educational, intellectual fashion? Well, of course we should. So that would be something where I would say, hey, we need to, field the questions from the congregation and then dig into those things and then be able to communicate those things in a time and a place outside of Sunday morning worship so that we can address those questions so that our kids, right, don't go to college, hear these, and go, well, the Bible's not real. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for following. Thank you for the feedback on these videos. Hopefully, they are helpful. I'll talk to you tomorrow.